Thank you, Lena, and thank you, friends of the library. I am not Gordon Lightfoot. Mike Fornes is my name. I'm from Mackinac City. I met Gordon for the first time about 22 years ago, and we maintained a correspondence, a friendship. And when I started performing his music 17 years ago, he was a great help to me. And the players in his band were a great help to the players in the band that I formed. We tried to get things as close to the record sound as we could. That's what a tribute does, you know. So we worked on that a long time, and they were a great help to us. Of course, we lost Gordon on May the 1st of 2023, so I miss him. It was very good to me. But the idea that I would perform at the bell tolling ceremony was a unique thing because Gordon was asked to come and could not because of touring schedules. For a while it was because of health. I remember one year it was because of this thing called COVID. I wasn't able to go. So I was asked to come in and do it, and I think 2 years after I started doing it, I saw him backstage after a show, and he said, "Michael, I understand now you're a pinch hitter." I said, "Yeah, I'm a pinch hitter, Gord. I'm playing your music, playing your song." So he was good with that, and he thanked me for that, and the families have just been very gracious people, very wonderful people. So we'll cover all those things today. The presentation's about 90 minutes long. The first half is going to be about the ship. The second half is going to be about the song. Okay? So you'll know where we are in the program when I shift gears for that second half. Okay? So let's start first of all talking about this ship. 50 years ago, can you imagine? It's been 50 years since the Edmund Fitzgerald sank on November 10th, 1975. And if I could take you there, if anybody could go there, because you can't go there now, it's declared off limits. It's a grave site. The Canadian government controls it. It's in Canadian waters of Lake Superior. You can't just show up in your boat. You're not supposed to be there. And you certainly can't dive on it. You can't go down there. It's 530 feet down. As I understand it, the temperature there never varies much between winter and summer. It's usually about 36, 37, 38 degrees at that depth. And you know that all 29 men who died are still there. None of the bodies were ever recovered. They're all still there in the ship. But if we could look at it today, which would be next to impossible because no matter how much lighting you could provide, you wouldn't be able to see the whole thing. It's massive. It's a massive ship on the bottom. Not as big as the 1,000 footers we have today on the lakes, but still, at the time, 729 feet long was the longest on the Great Lakes. And to see it on the bottom now, you couldn't get anywhere where you could get enough light on it to see it. That's the issue. But before it was declared off limits, some video was shot, some pictures were shot, many, many thousands of pictures were shot, and they were put together. And were put together to where you could actually put a portrait together of what the ship looked like. And from that, somebody made a diorama, a model of what it looked like. If I could show you what it looked like today, you'd be looking at this. It's broken in two. There's a lot of damage up near the bow. If that's my agent calling, tell him I'm working. I ask politely, you know, to please shut off the phones and put them away. There's going to be some portions of this program that are going to be pretty sad, and that just ruins it when we get to that point. So please, again, thank you. The ship hit the bottom, not bow first. It hit the bottom and slid into the bottom. You can see by the edge of the bottom of the lake, the mud, the way it's pushed up along the sides. It slid forward. All that damage up around the pilot house, all around the bow. That didn't happen hitting the bottom. It's all the way around in different areas. That happened topside. That happened up on the surface of the lake. That was the force of the waves bending that heavy steel in such a manner that it crumpled it. The captain, first mate, wheelsman, maybe a radio operator, 3 or 4 people at most would have been in that area. On the stern, that's where the crew would have been that were working in the engine room, off duty, in their bunks, hanging on for dear life. Probably nobody in the galley area. If they were just sitting, but I mean just holding on. We think that that's where most of the men are, where it's upside down in that section of the ship. It's a horrifying sight, really. Of course, our Great Lakes are waterways. This is how we get goods transported all across North America. And they come in across 5 Great Lakes, coming in from the St. Lawrence Seaway. Some of them ocean-going vessels. We call them salties. Those are the ones that come in from foreign lands. And they usually arrive in the spring. They bring goods from overseas, and then rather than go all the way back to some other continent empty, which would cost a lot of money for them, they stay in the Great Lakes and they work the Great Lakes for the summer. And they'll do short haul transport. They'll go from Buffalo to Cleveland. They'll go Cleveland to to Chicago. They're foreign ships. They go right by my house. I'm next to the Mackinac Bridge, and I see them coming by all the time. As a kid, I used to love to look at the flags and try to figure out what country they were from. And they're from everywhere, all around the world. But about this time of year, they're starting to get out of the Great Lakes. They're starting to take things and go back to their home countries because they know better than to be here during the month of November because it's treacherous. Way worse than the ocean, they will tell you. The ones that stay in the Great Lakes, we call them the Lakers. Those are the ones that are here all the time. They can't go through the locks and get out to the ocean. They don't need to. They stay right here. They do all their work here. 5 Great Lakes: Erie, Ontario, Huron, Michigan, and the biggest, Superior. How big is Superior? Bigger than all the rest. So big that if you were to take the area of Lake Superior, you could put all the water from Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario into the space of Lake Superior, and you could add one more Lake Erie. That's how big it is. That's how deep it is. It's vast, it's deep, it's far across. It's a sea. It's a freshwater sea. It's an ocean out there, but it's not salt water. We figure that over the years, 7,000 shipwrecks, 30,000 lives lost, probably, on our Great Lakes. Lake Superior, with 240 shipwrecks alone, right off the coast of Whitefish Point between 1816 and 1975. Whitefish Point, a bad, bad area in a storm. Another one, the Keweenaw Peninsula, sticking up. Our prevailing winds are northwesterly. If the winds are coming this way, a lot of the old sailing ships would run into trouble when they got near the Keweenaw. They'd get into more trouble when they'd get near Whitefish Point because the winds would blow them ashore. That's where they got trouble. You can see where the Fitzgerald is. About 17 miles off Whitefish Point, very close to the Canadian side of that part of the lake. Did you know the Fitzgerald was a Michigan ship? It was. It was built pretty close to here in River Rouge. A ship built of steel to carry steel. That was its job. It carried it in the form of taconite pellets. Iron ore is very difficult to transport. So what they do when they get it out of the mine, they'll bake it into a mold and add something called taconite to it. And that gives it a solid form. It comes out of the mold, they break it like the marbles we played with as a kid, about that size. And those can be transported. Now you can put that into a rail car. You can dump it down a chute. It can go down into the hold of a ship. The conveyor belt can bring it out when it's time to unload it. And a conveyor on a crane can take it and put it on a dock and have it right there for the next railroad car to pick it up and take it to the steel mill. When they get to the steel mill, They bake it again, and the taconite burns away. And what's left? Iron ore. It's a pretty simple process. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's a great way to move the ore to the point where you could make steel out of it, because it's flighty. A sailor told me once it's kind of like trying to move wet baby powder. It's sticky. It's not something you can move very easily, and when it gets heavy, and depending on the temperature, depending on the humidity, it can be troublesome. Not once you add taconite to it. You can move those pellets pretty easily. So the Fitz started out as hull number 301. It had a number as opposed to a name. And the whole idea that this was going to be the biggest ever on the Great Lakes was something that got a lot of attention. The Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge in 1958 started to build this ship. And it was quite a sight. People came from all over to see it. It was a big attraction in Detroit. People came down just to see what that ship looked like. How was it coming along? It was huge, massive out of the water to look at, you know. All different angles had different ways of looking at it. You just were so impressed by the size of this ship, because nobody had ever seen anything this big on the Great Lakes. The propeller was 28 feet in diameter. So big, they had to use a block and tackle to hold it still. If that thing ever started to move, somebody would get killed. They had to be very careful in the shipyard working on this vessel. And when it was launched, it took a year and a week from the day the keel was laid, and the ship was ready to go. They were ready to put it in the water. And weighing 7,500 tons was very, very big. And the way that ships were launched in the Great Lakes was usually sideways. Ocean-going vessels, the Navy, submarines, destroyers, they're usually launched stern first. They back them down a gangway and they go into the water. But in the Great Lakes, you send them over sideways, because there's usually not much room in the well where you're going to put the ship. And when they did that, they had a name for it. Edmund Fitzgerald, the CEO of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. They owned the ship. They put up the money to build the ship. They were going to own it, and they were going to lease it out to companies that would use it to transport iron ore, and they would make a profit off the lease and on a percentage of what was carried. So a good investment. See where all your insurance premiums go? Things like this. You know, they're investing the money all the time because they know there's going to be losses at some point. Edmund Fitzgerald's wife was very proud of him. Her husband was a distinguished top-flight businessman, had a beautiful home in Milwaukee, and now he had the biggest ship in the Great Lakes named after him. That was really something. Of course, she got to crack the champagne bottle to launch it. That was the honor that went to her. It took her 3 tries. And that, supposedly, is an omen of bad luck. If that bottle doesn't break the first time, apparently the ship is already doomed. That's what the old sailors say. But they have that bottle pretty wrapped up so that the glass doesn't come back on the person that's doing the christening. And they probably told her, you know, try it again. And after the second time, they said, hit it. And she gave it a good whack, and there it went into the water, sideways, with a huge crowd of people there to watch on a sunny July day, the 7th of July, 1958. 15,000 people showed up just to watch this ship get launched because it was so big and so powerful and so huge, and in a very small area where it went. But they had it all tethered and tied up with the tugboats, and they were ready to go. And from there, the Fitzgerald set records for many years, carrying the most tons of iron ore. And why wouldn't they? They were the biggest. They were the fastest. They could do more than the other ships. Fleets back in those days had 60-some ships that would carry goods. Today, the companies that are left, might have 8 or 9, 10. They're bigger. They can carry more. They don't need to have more ships. When I was a kid, the ships were smaller, but they were coming through the straits all the time. Now, it's a big thing when you see a ship come through, but they're monsters. They're enormous, but they're carrying a lot more. First time they came through the Soo Locks, wow, what an event that was. They were carrying, to say there, 30,800 tons of taconite pellets. That was a new record to see that much tonnage come through the Soo locks. And you know, they wanted all the publicity they could get. They came through at 4:30. Not 4:30 in the morning, 4:30 in the afternoon. Newspapers were there, television coverage. It was a big deal to see this ship come through. And of course, you've seen ships with the numbers going down the bow. You know, it tells how much draft they have. You know, how much water are they drawing? You know, how heavy are they, right? Well, a photographer for the Soo Evening News snapped a picture of those numbers and put that in the paper and talked about how heavy this ship was. The insurance company wanted to make the most money they could, so they overloaded the ship right from the get-go, and they always overloaded it. And over time, that takes a toll on metal. There's metal fatigue that happens. Did that play a role in the sinking? Possibly, quite possibly. But they came through. You've been up there. You've been to the Soo locks. That lock well, where the ships come in, is 30 feet. You got 30 feet of water in there, 30 feet deep, to bring a big ship like this through. That newspaper man took that picture, and it showed that the Fitzgerald was loaded 27 feet 6 inches in a 30-foot lock well. That's about this much between the bottom of the ship and the bottom of the lock, right? There's not much room there. Well, they got out of the lock and headed down Lake Huron, and the captain got a call from the company. We just saw this in the newspaper that you were loaded to 27 feet 6 inches. Yes, sir. You do realize that's a 30-foot lock at the Soo. Yes, sir. What were you thinking? You could have carried more. And that's the way they looked at it. Yeah, they could have. They could have carried more. You know, I mean, how close do you want to cut it? And that was the way it was. That was the thinking that went into the money, you know, to make the money, to have this ship working. So it was a big deal to have something like that come through the Soo locks. And you know, back in those days, I mean, today everybody crowds around to see the 1,000-footers. But back then, to see the Edmund Fitzgerald come through, that was really something. People would line up to watch, just like today, they come out to see the big 1,000-footers that come through. Of course, prior to September 11th, 2001, you could get a lot closer to those ships. You could stand right up there and almost touch them. You'd feel like you could touch a ship. You were so close. Today, they've got iron fences all the way around the locks that keep people away, and they've got a nice platform built where you can be up high and look down on them, but you can't get close like you used to. We have to protect the locks. If anything ever happened to those Soo locks, ships couldn't get through. Automobile production in our country would pretty well stop, because we don't have the railroad set up anymore that we used to that would move iron ore to the steel mills. We depend on ships to do that job. But what a treat, you know, to bring your family there, to see a big ship like that come through. This is early 1970s, I believe. I'm basing that on the pants that man is wearing. You remember those. But the crew would come in and they'd enjoy a day like that. I mean, it's boring, really, until you get somewhere on a ship like that. You can see the cook up there with his hat on. I mean, they're talking to people. Seemed like they always answered the same questions. You know, people would yell out, you know, where are you coming from? Where are you headed to? What are you carrying? How many on board? Always the same questions. Well, sometimes on a nice day, they'd look out in the summer and they'd look for a family, try and see if they could spot a little guy, you know, maybe 9, 10 years old. How old is he? 4. Well, he'd be too young for this job, but when he grew up a little bit, they would watch for somebody that, you know, was about a 9 or 10-year-old, and they'd have a canvas bag They'd attach a line to it, and they'd yell out, "Hey, kid!" Whirl that thing around and throw that thing off the ship, and it would land right on the concrete deck, and right at the kid's feet. He'd look at it and say, "Take the line off, unclip it, and look inside." He'd unclip it and look in there. There was money in there. They'd say, "Take that bag, go across the street to that restaurant, and get us some pasties for lunch." Because the restaurant knew they were coming. So they had everything ready to go. The only question was how to conduct the exchange. So they'd fill up that bag with the pasties and give it back to the boy, and he'd run across the street and come back over there, and they'd say, "Hook up the line, son." And he'd hook it up like that, and "Keep the change, sonny." And they'd pull that thing up there like that. You know, that little guy would have a story to tell his buddies all summer long, you know. Now, can you imagine your grandkids today being allowed to walk across Portage Avenue alone, let alone to conduct an exchange at a cash register with a stranger? I mean, that just wouldn't happen, you know. Different times. But that's the way it was. And the Fitzgerald was very popular because the crew would, and other ships would do that too, not just them, but the Fitz had the biggest crowds because they were the biggest ship. That's who people came to see. Oftentimes the route was from Minnesota or Wisconsin down to Ohio. They'd go to Toledo or Cleveland or Detroit. Two Harbors, Minnesota, Duluth, Superior, Wisconsin. That would be the route. If you had a family, you'd want to live at one end or the other, because they would make that journey, round trip, probably 28, 29 times over the course of a summer. And so you're looking at, you know, over 50 one-ways. If your family lived in Toledo like the captain did, then you get to see them more often. If you're up around Marshfield, Wisconsin, or some of the suburbs outside Superior or Duluth, why, you know, your father, your grandfather, your son, your brother, they'd get home. They'd get home a lot more often because they'd be close by there. So that's what they did. You can see in this shot the Fitz is loaded. See how low the anchor wells are to the water there? They're full up, and they always were. Ernest McSorley, the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald, his very first photo for his very first license. He sailed on the Great Lakes for 40 years, 25 of them as a captain. Very, very distinguished honor. He was the best. And when the Fitzgerald came along, they said, "Ernie, you've earned it. You get the best ship in the fleet. You're the new captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald." Boy, that was a proud moment. And then when he retired, of course, they gave him a clock, you know. Retirement dinner was held in Detroit. He came up from Toledo with his wife, and the ship was in Toledo. They were ready to go. One last trip. That's him on the left. On the way home, I've read that his wife said, "Ernie, is this really it? You really going to retire?" He said, "I am. We got one more trip to go, and then I'll be able to spend a lot of time with you." It didn't work out that way. Another captain on the Great Lakes was J.B. Bernie Cooper. Bernie Cooper. He was in charge of the Arthur M. Anderson. The Anderson was older than the Fitzgerald by 6 years. Not quite as fast, and certainly not as big, not as much capacity. But they ran the same route as the Fitzgerald quite often. They would go the same places. Captains be talking on the radio all the time. They'd crisscross. Sometimes they'd catch up to each other and they'd have a little time more to chat. That brings us to November 9th, 1975. That was the day that the Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin for a 2-day trip across Lake Superior. I just played a show 2 nights ago in Superior, Wisconsin. It was the last port that the Fitzgerald was in. When they left, that was the last place anybody saw them alive, was at Superior. Very proud community, and they had quite a celebration up there in their shipping community, and we were featured as musical guests to perform a concert, and we played for them. That was really quite an experience for me. The Anderson left Duluth, and the Anderson was probably up already around the Apostle Islands by the time the Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin. And the captains started talking about this weather report they'd received, because there was bad storm coming in from the northwest, coming in across the plains of Saskatchewan and Manitoba, headed down through South Dakota, Minnesota. It was going to cross Ontario and come right across the Great Lakes, and they thought that it was going to be a bad one. But they'd been in storms like this before, both captains had. But you want to stay away from the Keweenaw Peninsula, you want to stay away from Whitefish Point, maybe the thing to do would be to take a higher route, more northerly, go up towards Isle Royale, stay away from that landmass of the Keweenaw jutting out there. And then, if you could do that in one day, the second day of the trip could be spent making a right turn, and you'd have that bad storm at your back, pushing you. You wouldn't be fighting it so much. It'd push you right in to Whitefish Bay. So they agreed to do that. And what a surreal, warm, balmy November Sunday afternoon was November 9th. You don't see weather like that in November, especially on Lake Superior. The guys were working on the deck with their shirts off. It was that warm out. The seas were flat calm, sunny skies. By mid-afternoon, it started to cloud up a bit. By dinner time, it started to rain. The barometer was dropping, the temperature was dropping, and by nighttime, when the shift changed, that rain had turned to sleet, and it was starting to freeze on the deck. Not a good thing for the ships. Captain Cooper on the Anderson said that he was awakened at about 3 in the morning by his crew. And they said, we just wanted you to know that the barometer is really dropping fast, and we're getting really heavy seas and high winds out here. And he said, I can feel it in my bunk here. What are we looking at? He said, well, Captain, right now we're at seas of 15 feet, and the waves are being pushed by pretty strong winds. We're up around 40 miles an hour, 35, 40 miles an hour already. That's not good. He said, has the Fitzgerald passed us? They said, yes. The Fitzgerald passed us about midnight. They caught up to us and overtook us. So they're ahead of us now. He said, okay, just keep me apprised of what's going on. Very good. By morning, it was a lot worse. It was a lot worse. And on they went, and the Fitzgerald made the first right turn. And by making that right turn by Michipicoten Island, they were going to have the wind at their backs. But that's when both captains saw a new weather forecast. Now, they already knew about the one that was coming in from the northwest, but this was another forecast updated to show that there was another storm coming from the northeast. And this one was just as bad. These two storms were going to collide right over where these ships were. Today we would call that a bomb cyclone. Now you not only had winds pushing you and waves pushing you from the stern, which a sailor likes, but now they were also coming in from the port side, from the left side. And that was causing a lot of confusion on the ship. The ship was twisting and turning, and both vessels were endangered, really. The Anderson made the turn, and that's when they got the call from the Fitzgerald, and Captain McSorley said, I've got problems up here. 2 of my vents have blown off, my deck vents. They have these big hoods, you know, that sit on the deck of the ship that allow air to come in and out of the area below. They were gone. Well, that's going to leave a pretty sizable hole in 2 places on the deck, and they were taking seas over those decks. Is that enough to sink a ship like the Edmund Fitzgerald? No. There's water coming in, but it's not enough to sink a ship. And he said, the other problem I've got is my radar mast has blown away. I don't have my antenna anymore. And Captain Cooper said, if I'm not mistaken, you have 2 radars on the Edmund Fitzgerald. He said, yes, I do. They're both disabled. Both are gone. I'm sailing blind. I don't know where I'm at. Visibility was bad. It was snowing sideways. The winds were coming in so hard, they couldn't see a thing. He said, well, I'll try to give you a position fix that I can see you on my radar, and I'll help you get yourself into Whitefish Bay. Now, there were a number of ships in Whitefish Bay that were anchored. They didn't come out because they thought this is too bad of a storm. They were going to wait it out. Well, they were all hearing all this radio chatter between these 2 ships. And the next thing you know, he tells him where he is, and the Fitzgerald is coasting along, and on the radar, Morgan Clark, the first mate of the Arthur M. Anderson, tells Captain Cooper, look at this. Look where the Fitzgerald is. He's almost on top of Caribou Island. Well, there's a shoal area around Caribou Island. It's very shallow. And Captain Cooper said, I wouldn't want our ship to be in there. That's very shallow. In a storm like this, I'm going to call him. Well, it looks like he's cleared it now. He's beyond that shoal. So I guess he made it okay. He called up and said, how are you making out? He said, well, we're taking on a lot of water. He said, you got your pumps on? He said, I do. We're taking in more water than we can pump out. Great Lakes ships have enormous pumping capacity. They can move thousands of gallons. And if they were taking in more water than that, that's not water that's washing in over the deck and coming in some holes that are left by a vent that's gone. That's something that's happening from down below. Did they run aground? Did they hit rocks coming across that shoal? Did the bottom of the Fitzgerald rip open at some point and they're taking on water from below? You would think, if they're taking on that much water. And McSorley said, I've got a bad list to starboard. I'm leaning to my right side. Well, they're overloaded. They're low in the water anyway. They're leaning to the starboard side, and they're slogging through these enormous waves that are washing across their deck. It's not a good scenario. And Captain Cooper says, well, try and check your speed down a little bit. I'll get closer to you to catch up, and maybe I can give you a hand if you need help. I don't know what he thought he was going to do, you know, under those circumstances. But he said, we're almost there. You know, a few more hours and we'll have it made. We'll be okay. On they went. Suddenly, the Anderson gets rocked by 3 enormous waves that come from the stern, wash over their pilot house, all over the decks, and over the bow as well. They were huge. Were these the 3 sisters? Great Lakes captains talk about these things that happen during the worst storms, where 3 huge storms, or a storm will produce 3 huge waves that are the worst part of the storm. And if you survive that, you're probably okay. Well, the Anderson hangs on, and those guys on that ship thought they were goners. They thought this was it. You know, the first one hit, the second one hit, the third one hit. They made it. They were okay. But those waves are heading straight ahead for the Edmund Fitzgerald, and soon they're going to catch up to her. Captain Cooper calls, or Captain McSorley, and he says, how are you doing? And the only thing he hears is, we're holding our own. And that's the last thing that came from the Edmund Fitzgerald in terms of a radio transmission or any kind of a report. The winds were up to 80 miles an hour. The waves were 30 feet high. Terrible conditions for any ship. Somehow the Anderson hangs on, but the Fitzgerald appears to be in big trouble. And that's when, all of a sudden, Captain Cooper notices he can't see them anymore. He was catching up, but he can't see their lights anymore. Maybe they're in a cloud of snow. He checks the radar. They're not on the radar. Maybe the snow has covered them there. Maybe the waves are so high that you can't see the ship. Sometimes that could happen. They don't show up on radar because the waves are so big. McSorley had mentioned that he had fence line down. Fence line. The railing along a ship like that. It's not a brass railing. You know, it's not like a cruise ship. It's a post with a cable going through it a couple places. Well, if that fence line is snapped and is gone, that tells us the ship is doing this to snap that cable. Why would that be? Because the waves are worse on the Great Lakes than they are on the ocean. On the ocean, they get these big, huge rollers that are just enormous, and a ship goes right up the roller, and they end up going right down because they're so big and wide. You know, on the ocean, they go way up. They're slow. Then they go way down. Then they go way up again. Then they drop you way, way down again. You know, am I making you seasick? You know, that's how it happens. That's how you get seasick on the ocean, right? It's because of those slow motion of those waves. But on the Great Lakes, they're closer together, and they're more peaked. Well, if one wave picks up the bow of the ship, and the next one is so close that it picks up the stern, what's holding up the middle? Nothing. Nothing. Metal fatigue, stress, steel. You know, it's not like a coat hanger. You know, you bend that enough times and you'll break it, but it's steel. But I mean, it has to have an effect. It has to be wearing on it at some point. Rivets have to be popping out. Trouble. At 7 o'clock, that last radio report was we're holding our own. At 7:10, she's gone. Did that ship ride up a big wave and then heading into the next wave just take a nosedive, just go right into the next wave and never come up again? That's what Captain Cooper feared happened. And he called the Coast Guard and said, I'm really worried about the Edmund Fitzgerald. I can't find them on radar. I don't have a visual anymore. They're not answering radio calls. I know their radar antenna had been disabled. Maybe their radio mast is down too and they can't hear me. Or maybe they can hear me but they can't transmit, but I can't get them to answer. Well, the Coast Guard asked ships that were anchored in Whitefish Bay to give them a call. They didn't answer them either. Captain Cooper said, God, I hope he didn't take a nosedive, because that's what he was worried about. They went right past the last place where the Fitzgerald had been. There was nothing there. They went on into Whitefish Bay and checked to see if maybe they'd made it, and they weren't there either. And that storm was just raging. Well, we've made it into Whitefish Bay, Captain Cooper said. And the Coast Guard said, Roger that. Do you think maybe you could turn around and go back out and have a look for those guys? You know, if there's any survivors? He said, my God, man, do you understand what we just went through? We were fearing for our lives. This is the worst storm I've ever seen in my career. To turn around and go back out into it, I'd be risking my ship. I'd be risking my crew. And they said, well, understand that. You do what you think you can do, but it would be great if you could go out and take a look. And the Anderson never dropped anchor. They turned around and they went back out there. And the William Clay Ford heard that transmission. They pulled up anchor and they went out to have a look. You know, these guys would want somebody to come look for them. And that's the brotherly feeling that they had out there. 4.5 hours. The last time they were seen by human eyes and when they sank. The Coast Guard started an active search 75 minutes later. 2 ships joined in the search. But the wreck isn't officially located visually until the next summer, 192 days later. Coast Guard Air Station Traverse City sent up a helicopter. They searched. There's nothing to see. The conditions were just brutal. Canadian Navy put up a plane and searched. They had a side scan sonar, and they reported a large mass of metal appearing at one point on the chart where there shouldn't be anything. Maybe that's the Edmund Fitzgerald. The search went on all night. typical Great Lakes fashion, the worst weather, and the next day, it's all fine. 17 miles off Whitefish Point, and just the other side of that crook in the border line there, close to Batchewana Bay. That's where the ship is. The next morning, the Reverend Richard Ingalls in the Mariners Church in Detroit started ringing the bell 29 times. A reporter driving by heard that and wondered what that was all about. He stopped at the church, and the pastor told him, "We lost a ship last night on Lake Superior, the Edmund Fitzgerald, 29 souls aboard." And he put that report on what we called the news wire back in those days, and that's how we all found out about the bell being rung 29 times, because it became a news item. And there's the Detroit News the next day. Crew of 29 is hunted in Lake Superior. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe they're all clinging to a life raft. Maybe they're all in one boat. Maybe they're floating with life jackets on, bobbing up and down, holding on to flotsam or whatever came up from the ship, and they're waiting for rescue. Maybe they washed ashore at Batchewana Bay. Maybe the tribal fishermen there will find them. But there was nothing to find. They were gone. No sight, no sign of anybody, no visuals, nothing. Just gone, just gone. Morning came, and at daybreak, the Anderson sees half of a lifeboat floating on the water. It was from the Edmund Fitzgerald. That lifeboat is now at the Museum Ship Valley Camps display in Sault Ste. Marie. And it's a horrifying thing to look at, because it's like two giant hands just ripped this thing in half, and there's only one half of it there. And it wasn't until the next summer that the Coast Guard dropped a camera down and was able to see the ship. And they ruled that the ship sank because of leaking hatch covers. When those decks were awash, those hatch covers maybe weren't torqued down tight enough, and that's how they leaked, and the National Transportation Safety Board backed them up. They said that's what happened. That's why the ship sank. Fitzgerald was gone. Simple as that. Okay. Second half of the program. Gordon Lightfoot upstairs in his music room, his writing room of his house in Toronto. And he had these 3 or 4 chords that he was fooling around with. It just was kind of a memorable thing of an Irish dirge that he recalled as a child. Didn't have any real plans for it. He just kept strumming this thing over and over with these several chords. It was about 11 o'clock, and he went downstairs to get a cup of coffee. When he got there, the news was on, CBC, telling about this ship that sank on Lake Superior. Gordon had been on the lakes. He had 3 sailboats during the time when he sailed, and he used to single-hand his small boat from Port Huron to Mackinac Island in the Port Huron to Mackinac sailboat race. He'd come up to Mackinac, where I was, and as he got into more money, he got a bigger boat, started doing Chicago to Mackinac. And then he got a much bigger one that he had built custom for him, had a crew of 10, and they raced the boat and he didn't even go. It was a big boat, big boat. But Gordon knew what could happen on the lakes. He was not in any storm like this. None of us ever were. But he knew that the weather can change and it can get nasty out there. And he knew how bad it could be. But he was frustrated because there wasn't much news coverage after that first night, after that first next day. There just wasn't anything to tell. I mean, no one had been located. They hadn't really seen the ship to know that that's what that mass of metal was. The media kind of backed off. There just wasn't anything to report. And plus the location. I mean, up where I am, it takes a while for news to get out, you know. I mean, if it happened today, yeah, Wolf Blitzer would be right there at the Sulaks doing reports all the time. You know, I mean, they would have 24-hour coverage of something like that because it'd be such a big story, you know. But back then, it wasn't, and didn't have that sort of capability, and plus, there was nothing to tell. We already said they disappeared. There's nothing new. It just kind of faded away. Well, at the time, Gordon was working on a new album. It was called Summertime Dream. And it was to be the follow-up for Gord's Gold. Remember Gord's Gold? Gord's Gold had If You Could Read My Mind, Sundown, Carefree Highway, Canadian Railroad Trilogy, Cotton Jenny. It went on and on. It had all these big hits, and it was a big seller. People bought it. And the record company said, Gord, people are listening to your music. You got to come up with a good one for this next album. Let's go. Get to work. Well, he had 22 songs that he worked on that he thought about putting on Summertime Dream. 22. The record company was going to take 10. See, back then, we used to have 5 songs on one side of a record, and we'd turn it over, and then we'd play the other 5 songs. You know, that's how it was, right? Well, they had to work it down to 10 songs. There was a lot of discussion back and forth between the producers and the record company, and Gord wanted these, and the guys in the band liked these better, and they were all trying to, you know, work this out as to how it would happen. And, you know, Gord knew that ship had gone down, and he had those chords that he'd been fooling with, but he really didn't have any real plan to write a song about it. But then he started to think a little more, because the next thing you know, Newsweek magazine came out with a story about a week or two later. And it wasn't a cover story. It wasn't a feature story. It was a blurb in the middle of the magazine in something they called the News Index. And here's, you know, they have a cover or a feature, and then here's a bunch of other things that happened last week, and they'd list them all and have a little story. There was a thing about national affairs, and then something about some Marines that got into trouble, and then down here, Great Lakes, the cruelest month, and then 5 paragraphs and a picture and a map, and then it ends down here, and you know, on the next page, probably some other stories, you know. But Gordon was fascinated by that. He read all this. And one thing that article had was a reference to something he'd never heard before. In here, they referred to this as the Gales of November. He thought, now that's catchy. I could write a song and call it the Gales of November. And he was thinking about doing that. And you can't read the article, but I'm going to quote to you from the first line, okay? The first line of this article says, according to a legend of the Chippewa tribe, the lake they once called Gitche Gumee never gives up her dead. Have you heard those words before? And it went from there. And Gord started to pull things out of this article because it was all we knew at the time that had happened. And it talks about the captain and how he was so experienced, and the crew, and they'd been in storms before, and they left, Superior, Wisconsin, and the Anderson was following them, and the captain, kept reporting that the conditions were getting worse and worse, and finally the Anderson lost sight of him, couldn't see their lights anymore, and they just disappeared, and they were gone, and kind of told the story that Gord put into the song from this article. And at the very end, it talks, as a wrap-up, it talks about the 126-year-old stone church in Detroit. And that's where a pastor rang the bell 29 times in memory of these men that died on this ship. And Gord wrote most of it from that article. He filled in a few blanks here and there. Some of it was conjecture. Some of it was things he knew happened on the Anderson, so they probably happened on the Fitzgerald. We'll get to that. But yeah, it mostly came from right here. So let's take a look at the words. How did Gordon write this song? That's the second half of our program here. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. Well, that's right from that article. That's Newsweek magazine right there. With a load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more then the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. Isn't that clever, how he turned that around to make that work? That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. Sailing on the Great Lakes is not like being on a cruise ship. The people on that ship, they don't stand at a brass rail with a cocktail and watch the sun go down, you know. It's not like that. You're in ports that are steel mills, you're unloading railroad yards, you're at docks, there's cranes moving around, there's machinery happening. It's loud, noisy, dirty. It's work. It's work. It's nothing like you would think it would be so romantic to be on a ship like this. That feeling would last, you know, a couple hours, and then that would be it. You wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like it. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. I told the people in Superior 2 nights ago, it's just too doggone bad that Gord didn't at least put the name of their town in it, you know. Coming back from some mill in Wisconsin, you know. And a little sidelight. Gord and the guys are up in the Sioux, and they're playing a concert years ago in Sioux, Canada. And they're in the dressing room, and you know, they're about 20 minutes away from going out on stage. And up on the wall is a chart, not a nautical chart, but like a framed picture of Lake Superior, a map. Did I do that? A map. And so the whole deal was that, you know, they were looking at this map. And Terry Clements, lead guitar player, not with us anymore, sad. But he was a humble guy. He just was one of these, ah shucks type of guys, you know. He'd play a fabulous lick in a concert and people would applaud it, you know, like the middle of sundown or something like that. And everybody would clap and he would just kind of go. Like, you know, just very unassuming. Well, he's up there looking at this map on the wall. And he sees Ontario, and then he sees Minnesota over here, and then Wisconsin down here, and then Michigan, you know, and there's the whole lake. And he's up there and he's running his finger across this map, looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. And Rick Haynes, the bass player, told me this story, and he says, Terry, what are you doing? He said, I don't know, Rick. He said, I can't find it. He said, you can't find what? He said, that town that Gord sings about in the song. He says, you can't find it? He says, no. He said, what town are you talking about? He said, Samillan. Samillan, Wisconsin. He couldn't find. He couldn't find Samillan, Wisconsin. So he heard him sing it every night, and he never saw it written out, and he just thought that was the name of the town. It was Samillan, Wisconsin. Anyway. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. And later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? Well, I asked Gord about that because, you know, the records show that they were going to go down Lake Huron after they went through the locks at the Sioux, and the first place they were going to stop was near Detroit at Zug Island. Do you know about Zug Island? Yeah, it's a dump. It's a place where ships dump their cargo, and then train cars come in and pick it up and take it where it's got to go, you know. So Zug Island. And after Zug Island, the next place they were going to go was Toledo. Then they were going to go to Cleveland. So what's up, Gord? He said, well, I thought Cleveland rhymed the best. So Cleveland got in the song. And it worked because with a crew and good captain well seasoned, when they left fully loaded for Cleveland, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? It makes sense. He worked. I mean, we wouldn't like the song as well, would we? If he had sang, when they left fully loaded for Zug Island. Nobody would like that, you know. There's Zug Island. Technically, it's an island because there's a canal cut around it. But yeah, there's coal stacked up there. There's stone, there's sand, salt, iron ore, all kinds of things that are sitting there with a train yard coming through. And they pick things up and take it where it's got to go. You know, it doesn't look anything like the island where I live. I mean, I don't see a fudge shop anywhere. The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late, and the breakfast had to wait, when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. All information that he either got out of that article or he found out that the Anderson, their crew, didn't show up for breakfast, you know. Probably it was that way on the Fitzgerald too. 4:30 in the afternoon, a picture from my collection. The winds were so high on the Mackinac Bridge, a semi was blown over on top of a car. And we thought that was the worst winds we'd ever seen up there. And you know what? It was, but it was nothing compared to what was going on 70 miles, 80 miles north up on Lake Superior. This was tame compared to that. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed you." Now, do we know that the cook did that? No, we don't. But Gord found out that the Andersons' cook didn't cook any. You want to make a nice big pot of chili for everybody? I mean, in that kind of weather, no, you're not going to do that. And nobody wanted to eat anyway. They were just hanging on. When they got into Whitefish Bay, that's when they would have their meal. You know, that's when it would all happen. But no, not while they were out there. Oh, this one's highlighted for you. At 7 p.m., a main hatchway caved in. He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know you." Well, it rhymed, but that's what the Coast Guard said happened. The hatch covers leaked. NTSB said the same thing, so Gord put that in the song. The captain wired in he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The boy on the right is Mark Thomas. He's from Cleveland Heights. The one on the left, Bruce Hudson. He had more experience than Mark, but he got Mark the job on the ship. Bruce was from North Olmsted, Ohio, another Cleveland suburb. Bruce's mom, Ruth, who stands about that tall, got to go see Gord in concert. A lot of the women of the surviving family members banded together because every year on November 10th it would get worse. The phones would ring, the letters would start coming in. You know, "We're doing a newspaper article. Can I talk to you about your loss?" You know, "Hey, we're doing a TV special about the Edmund Fitzgerald." You know, "How did it affect your family?" You know, "Yeah, we're doing a radio interview. Can you be up tomorrow morning and talk to us at 6:30 a.m. on our show?" You know, they got tired of it, and they just said, "Let's form a committee." So Gord called them the ladies of the committee, because they all would write to him and come to see him in shows, you know, because they liked the song. The women liked the song. But they went to Green Bay, went backstage afterwards, and Ruth Hudson walked right up to Gordon Lightfoot and said, "I've got a bone to pick with you." He said, "What?" She said, "Well, there's that line in the song. You say at 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in." He said, "Fellas, it's been good to know you. You know, my son Bruce was in charge of the hatch covers. You make it sound like my boys sank the ship." Wow, that hit Gord hard. He didn't write that to point the finger or blame somebody, you know. It's just what we knew at the time. He felt terrible. Do you know, you can't change the record, But do you know that from then on, in live concerts, he changed the words. He sang something different there. At 7 p.m., a main hatchway caved in. No longer. He sang other words. How about that? Pretty cool. The first time that I played at Whitefish Point, this little lady came walking up to me and said, "You're singing Gordon's song, I understand?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "Well, I'm Ruth Hudson." I said, "It's nice to meet you, ma'am." She says, "Are you aware that Gordon changed the words in the song?" I said, "No." She says, "Well, you don't sing at 7 p.m. a main hatchway caved in, because that didn't happen. My son was in charge of that, and that didn't happen." I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Yeah." Well, I started to wonder, and I started to check it out and everything, and I found out that, yeah, Gordon did change that in live shows. So I sang the other words. Ruth loved me from that minute on. And the families liked that too, that it was different, that it was sung differently. So that was a nice thing. This is incredible writing. How do you write like this? Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? Wow. The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. And then there's the theories. They might have split up. They might have capsized. Or they may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Now, I've got an appreciable distance between myself and our first row here tonight. But when I play at the Whitefish Point at that museum, I'm standing right there. And the people are right in front of me, and it's packed. It's so crowded in there, you can't move. And the first two rows are the wives and the sons and the daughters. And I got to tell you, I can't look at them. I can hear them. I see the tissues come out. But I've got to look at the back of the room and take a deep breath and focus and just remember why I'm there. Because I'm singing Gord's song for these family members. And I'm always afraid I'll fall apart. 15 years this year, and I'm already worried about this year. I'm already worried I'll fall apart because there'll be so many people that are going to be there that are close to these guys that died on the ship, So far, I've been able to do it. I think it's been good training to do this all these years. 8 years ago, I sang at my mother's funeral. 7 years ago, I sang at my father's, and I got through it. So I think it was a good training to play for these family members at Whitefish Point, because I got kind of used to, you can feel emotion. You can feel it coming up. You can feel it behind your eyes. And you don't want your voice to crack. And wish me well. Why did this ship sink? Well, 2 storms coming from different directions. The fact that maybe the 3 sisters washed over the stern of the ship, then washed over the pilot house. I mean, enormous waves. Nothing supporting the metal stress fatigue on those pieces of the ship. Leaking. Did they scrape the bottom and tear open the bottom and they're bringing in water? The pumps couldn't keep up. They were listing to starboard, leaning to one side. The pumps back then would be in the bilge, the lowest point in the boat, but maybe they couldn't get to the water on the right side where it was so heavy. Now, on the ships, they put pumps all the way across the bottom, not just in the middle. So it does a better job of getting rid of water quicker. A lot of things. All that damaged topside, wow. Terrible force of big, huge waves that can bend heavy metal like that. That steel is strong, and it's crumpled all up and down in different areas, different levels. It's not like it all hit the bottom at once. Lake Huron rolls, Superior sings in the rooms of her ice water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. In a musty old hall in Detroit, they prayed in the Maritime Sailors Cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. Well, when Gord read that article, didn't it say it was a 126-year-old stone church? What do you think it'd be like in there? You know, he wrote that. And then he finishes it, it's a reel, so it ends the same way it started. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down to the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early. So into the studio goes Gord with the band, and they're recording the Summertime Dream album. They've got it down to 10 songs. They're all going to be great. And they're going to work. And here's Gordon Lightfoot sitting over on this stool with a music stand in front of him, and he's got a legal pad. And he keeps scratching out words and changing this and moving it down to there and turning the page and looking back. And the guys in the band are like, what are you doing? He says, well, I've got this other song I'm working on. It's a shipwreck song. I said, what ship? He said, the Edmund Fitzgerald. It sank back in November. This is January of 1976 now. How did it sink? Did it collide with something? No, it was in a storm. Sank in a bad storm. 29 men died on it. Guys in the band didn't remember hearing about it. How's it going to go? Well, just, you know, just humming it a little bit. Terry Clement says, how are you going to start that song? He said, I don't know. He said, why don't you come up with something? He would do that a lot. Terry would often play the vocal line, like as a part in the middle, a little bridge in the song. He'd just play the vocal line that was being sung, you know. Terry came back the next day and says, hey, your shipwreck song, how's this? He had his acoustic guitar out. He played this little melody thing. Gord had been humming this, you know, this little, you know. He played that. Gord said, no, that's not it. That's not it. He said, what's wrong with it? He said, well, it's just not impactful. It doesn't grab you. I need something, you know, a little more distinctive, I guess. Came back the next day. He said, hey, how about this? What if I played on my electric guitar, and what if I put it through a distortion pedal, and it sounds like this, what we heard? Gord said, I like that. I like that. That's good. Rick Haynes said, you're going to have a storm? The ship sank in a storm? What if I took the bass and made sounds like thunder sometimes? He said, you could probably do that. Pee Wee Charles, the pedal steel player, said, I could probably make a thing like the wind on the steel sometimes, add a few little touches maybe. He said, yeah, you could. Just keeps humming and writing. Well, a few days go by. They're all done with what they're doing for the day, and they got time left in the studio. And Gord says, okay, let's play the shipwreck song all the way through. And the guy said, what do we play? He said, well, just what we talked about. Terry, start it off like you said you would, and then just Rick, come in whenever you can, and Pee Wee, if you want to touch on some steel stuff, you can do that. Let's just try it. I just want to sing it. Just try it. Well, they started it, and they got through the first verse, and Gordon stopped them and said, no, no, no. It's too slow. It's too, you're just kind of playing it straight. It's got to grab you. It has to have soul. You have to really have an impact when people hear this. You got to put more into it. I said, okay. Barry Keane, the drummer, says, are there drums in this, Gord? Do I get to play in this or no? He said, yeah, we could do drums. I'll nod to you when to come in. Like not hit the hi-hat or the cymbal, play the snare, nothing about what to do, just I'll nod to you when to come in, all right? That's all the direction he got. Well, he counted it down, he tried it a second time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they played, and they got all the way through it, and he sang it, and when they got all the way done, they stopped, and Terry told me that he said, "Sheesh, that thing gave me the chills up my spine." And Rick said, "Gord, that's something. I think you've got a hit there." And on the other side of the glass, the engineer said, "You guys want to hear it back again?" I said, "You mean you recorded it?" "Well, you've been fooling around with it for 2 weeks. I figured if you were going to play it all the way through, I'd roll tape." So they had it recorded. Well, they played it back again, and they were just stunned by it. And the producer said, let's call the record company. Maybe we could still get this on this album, Well, they did. Record companies listened to it. They said, well, okay, we'll think about it. Work on it, get it ready for the album, and we'll talk again when you've got it ready. They worked on that song for 2 weeks, and they never could get it to sound the same way that it sounded the first time they played it. And that's the version that's on the record. The guys in the band had never heard the words. They'd never even heard what he was singing about. They just jumped in and played their little thing when they could, and Gordon sang it straight through. That was on the radio. That was the #1 hit on Top 40 radio in Canada in 1976. #1. #2 in our country, by the way. It wasn't the #1 song in America. It's #2 in the top 40. You remember 1976? You know what beat the Edmund Fitzgerald? Barry Manilow, "I Write the Songs." Then there's the other chart they call the top one, the Hot 100. And on the Hot 100 in America, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, #2. And what beat him on the Hot 100? Rod Stewart, "Tonight's the Night." Sometimes it works out that way. Well, Gord played here in Detroit, and the Reverend Richard Ingalls came to see him and got backstage afterwards. He said, "Gord, thanks for putting me on your record. It's my claim to fame." And Gord said, "Well, I'm glad that it worked out." He said, "Gordon, while you're in town here, you should come over and visit our Mariners Church. It's quite nice in there. It's not musty at all." How do you think that made Gord feel? He changed that too. So I'm going to play this. We're almost at the end of this program. I'm going to play that song for you here in a couple minutes. At 7 p.m., a main hatchway caved in? No, I'm not doing that. And it's not a musty old hall in Detroit. I'm going to change that too, because that's how it works, okay? So I'm going to do it different. All right, to wrap it up, I could give you 29 stories about these guys. We've only got time for one. I'll give you one. And that's the story of David Weiss. David Weiss graduated from high school out in California and kind of floated around for a year or so trying to figure out what he wanted to do. Finally, he told his dad, "I want to become a ship's captain. I want to get a ship license. I want to drive big ships." And his dad said, "You can do whatever you want, son, but first you're going to go to college. I've been telling you to go to college. You've got to do it. You go to college, you can do whatever you want." He came back later and he said, "Hey, Dad, look at this. I found a place where I can get a college degree and get my ship license, my captain's license." He said, "Where?" He said, "Traverse City, Michigan. I want to go to the Great Lakes Maritime Academy." Well, he did. He went there, studied his first year, came the second year. It was time to get an internship. Like the other guys and gals, he wrote letters and tried to find a shipping company that would take him on. Came back to his counselor, who told me this story, and said, "Look at this. I've got it. I got an internship." He said, "That's great, David. Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to sail the Bahamas." I'm going to go out of Miami, Florida. He said, well, that's terrific. When do you leave? This was like early September, you know. He said, well, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I'll be back by the end of October. He said, David, I'm not sure that's going to work for you. He said, why? He said, well, there's that one class that you have to take, and it only is offered in the fall term, and you didn't take it last year, so you were going to take it this year. You're signed up for it. That professor, you have to be here. That project that he has you do, you have to be here. It's not like today where you sometimes do things online, you know. You have to be here. Oh, no. He was pretty upset. They went and talked to the professor. The professor said, no, I can't let you do that. If you don't take it this year, come back next fall. Take it next fall. Well, he wanted to graduate in May from a 2-year program. He didn't want to come back next fall. He was pretty upset. A classmate heard about it and said, I've got an idea. Let's go talk to the counselor. They went in there and he said, I have my internship too. He said, but I don't leave until the middle of October, and I'll be back in time for Christmas break. What if David and I switch ships? Well, we'd have to find out if we can do that. They checked, and it got approved. So the other boy took David's ship, went to Miami, Florida, sailed on the Bahamas, and came back. And David Weiss took the other guy's ship, and in the middle of October, he boarded the Edmund Fitzgerald and booked a ticket to eternity. The buoy is barely 3 feet tall. You can't see it from the shoreline. Those families would go to Whitefish Point on November 10th, and no matter what the weather would be, sometimes it'd be okay, sometimes it'd just be fierce, terrible, but you can't see the buoy. They would show up there and they'd throw flowers on the water. The waves would wash them back. One year, they had crosses made, and they burned the names of the men into the crosses, and they lined them up on the beach in the sand. It was really a nice looking thing they did, you know. Springtime came. The ice had been there. The ice just took it away. It was gone, you know. They needed a place to grieve. Ruth Hudson put up a memorial in the grave in the cemetery in North Olmsted. And she had a stone put up, and it had her name and her date of birth, her husband's name, his date of birth, Bruce Hudson, date of birth, September, underneath that, November 10, 1975, SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Yeah. But he's not there. He's not in the grave there. Ruth started a campaign to try and get something done, to do something at Whitefish Point, have a memorial there. That would be the thing to do. Well, she ran into a lot of red tape, you know. She went to Lansing. She went to Washington, D.C., talked to senators, representatives. Well, actually, the ship's in Canadian waters. She kept getting told that, you know. Well, she went to Ottawa, went to Canada, talked to them. They listened to her. They said, and how many Canadians were on the ship? None. None. And what is it you want us to do? Get something from the ship and bring it back? I mean, how could we do that, you know? She just kept phone calls and trips and travel, and Ruth's a pretty persistent little gal, and she just wasn't getting anywhere, you know? And after years and years of trying this, finally she's talking to somebody with the Navy, and they said, well, you know, actually, if you were able to get something from outside the ship, like maybe the ship's bell, which is on the top of the pilot house, we wouldn't have to penetrate inside the ship where it's so dangerous. We have equipment now that could do that. You do? Yes, it's called the newt suit. The newt suit. One diver would wear it and go down and be tethered from a line that goes up to a ship, and then they would use a cutting torch and they would cut away the tripod that holds the bell, and it could be lifted up with a crane. It's heavy, you know. We could do that. Oh, great. So where's the newt suit? Well, the newt suit has its own ship that supports it. Right. And then there's a mini submarine that has to be involved too for support, and that's on its own ship. So there's really 2 ships that are involved. And Ruth said, yeah, well, where are they? Oh, they're in Vancouver. Vancouver. You're going to bring that to the Sioux? How's that going to work, you know? Oh, and you'd need to have a crane, you know, heavy enough to lift this bell, so that's going to be another ship. And then you'd have another vessel to house the crew. They're going to be out there for a couple weeks. And who's going to pay for all this? I mean, it was insurmountable. It just didn't look like it was going to happen. And just about then, word got out that they were thinking about doing this. And you know, National Geographic magazine came in, and they said, we would like to talk about this. If you could do this expedition, maybe we could send our photographer, Emery Christoph, along and have him take pictures of it, and we would do a magazine article about it. And if you do, we'll donate money. Well, the cost for the project was here. And if National Geographic donates money, now we're down to here. And they called Sony Corporation and said, we're going to think about doing this. Would you want your cameras to be used? And we would give you publicity for using your cameras. And Sony said, we're in. Dropped it down to here. And the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum said, if the bell's recovered, we could give it a home right here at Whitefish Point, and the families want that. So we will donate to that fund too, to pay for this, for the Navy to do this. Now we're down to here. The Navy said, well, we'll discount it. We'll give you, you know, we understand the cause here, and we'll lower the price. Well, we're still here, okay? And for a year, it sat, and nobody did anything. And it looked like it wasn't going to happen, and Ruth was despondent. And do you know, the Sioux tribe of Chippewa Indians wrote the check. So the legend lives on from the Chippewa on down, doesn't it? And they paid for it. And in 1995, Bruce Fuoco was the diver who went down there and cut that thing loose. And they brought it up with a crane and brought it to the surface. And what a thing that was. That bell came to the surface, and they were lifting it out of the water, and it had a sling on it to pull it up, and it shifted, and it rang. And all the families were there watching this. It's like the voices of the men were in that bell, speaking to them from 530 feet down, you know. Incredible, incredible. And Bruce told me that if he knew then what he knows now, he would not have taken the job, because he almost got killed. There was a serious accident down there involving the gases that were coming off the cutting torch. They filled the bell, and the bell was full of gas. And when they finally got the last leg of the tripod cut loose, the bell swung right towards him, emptying the gas, and it came that close to hitting his plexiglass mask there. And if it had hit that and broke it, he would have been gone like that. It was so close to happening. But it didn't, and they got the bell, they put it up onto a ship, and then there was another bell that they made that had the names of the men inscribed on it. And Bruce took that one down and put it on the deck of the ship where the original bell had been as a memorial. So the bell was taken to Michigan State, and they cleaned it up, and now it's on display at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. And there it is. When you walk in, it's the first thing you see. And it's like walking into a church, because everything goes quiet in reverence for that bell. So every year on November 10th, the family members assemble, and they get to ring the bell for their lost loved one. And I think it was probably, probably it's been maybe 8 or 9 years ago now, that Ruth Hudson wasn't there. And we knew that she was declining in health. She was 89 years old. Her niece came, Pam Wittig, and Pam came in, and you know, we're getting ready to go. We're getting ready to start, and Pam came in and took her seat. She saw me up there. I said, what? Come here. I said, what? She said, Aunt Ruth has a favor to ask of you. I said, don't worry, I'm going to sing the other words. I've got that down. No, that's not it. I said, what? She said, Ruth wants you to ring the bell for Bruce tonight. I said, no, Pam. I said, you're his cousin, and your family. You should ring the bell. She said, do you want to argue with Aunt Ruth? I said, no, I don't. So I got to ring the bell for him, and that was really, really something. That was really, really cool to be able to do that. And the Coast Guard guys are there too, and you know, if a family member isn't there, they're standing by, and they'll send somebody up to ring a bell for them. And it was always so funny because these big Coast Guard guys will walk up there, they'll say a name, and they walk up there and they grab that lanyard, you know, they'll say a name, you know, Mark Thomas. Like that, they'll walk up there and bing. Bruce Hudson. And Ruth walks up there. Bang! You can hear that bell all the way over in Batchewana Bay. You know, it's so far, you know. But anyway, she showed up the next year. She was there, 90 years old. She walked in. There she is next to the guy with the guitar. And two other surviving family members were in this picture with the bell, and there we are. And Ruth was calling the shots and just, you know, just being Ruth, and it was so cool to see her again. And then the following year, she didn't come again. And we learned that she was now in 24-hour care in a home, a nursing home, and bedridden, and was not going to ever come out of this facility that she was in. This was her place, and we were going to miss her. Well, the families gather the day before on November 9th. That way there's no media, there's no extra people, it's just quiet, and they can be together. And they're in the lightkeepers' quarters up there, and they had the coffee and the cookies and, you know, just having a good time talking. And it was cold out. And all of a sudden, there's just chill comes down the hall, like somebody left the door open or something. And we could hear somebody come down the hall. Around the corner, Gordon Lightfoot walks in. Gord, what are you doing here? This is great. He said, I had a show last night in upstate New York, and I've got one tomorrow night in Massachusetts, and I have tonight off. So we took the Learjet and we flew into the Sioux, and I rented a car. He drove up there just to see these family members, you know. Well, Pam got this idea going, and she said, hey, if I can get a cell signal, you know what we should do? Let's call Aunt Ruth in the nursing home, and everybody say hi to her. Wow, what a great idea. Well, they got a hold of her, and you know, that's a 5-second conversation, because there's all these people there that want to talk. You know, hi Ruth, how are you? You know, hey, we miss you. Yeah, I'm going to sing the other words for you. No problem, no, Ruth. Hey, we love you. Okay, bye-bye. Next. You know, we just keep passing the phone around. It's going all the way around. Everybody's talking to her. All of a sudden, they're done. And Pam gets the phone back, and she says, Aunt Ruth, are you still there? Yeah, okay. She says, there's one more. And you could hear the speaker. She goes, well, who is it? Hello, Ruth. This is Gordon Lightfoot. And Gordon walked around the corner and talked to her privately down the hall. And he was gone maybe 7-8 minutes talking to her, you know. He came back and handed Pam the phone, said, here you go. She goes, is she still on the line? He said, no, she said she had to go. So she cut Gord off, you know. So she said, okay, that's fine. Anyway, that was at 10 minutes to 4. Do you know at 5 after 4, that cell phone rang, and on the other end, a nurse said, Pam, I'm so sorry, your Aunt Ruth just passed. She said, you're kidding. We were just talking to her. She said, oh, I know. She was going on and on with somebody. And I left the room for a minute, and when I came back, the phone's off. She said, I'm sorry, she's gone, you know. Wow. We know for a fact that the last person that Ruth Hudson talked to on this earth was Gordon Lightfoot. How cool is that, you know? So it was really a special thing. All right, we're at the end of this program. It's time for me to pick up the 12-string guitar. This is the Gibson B45 model that Gordon used to play this song. He used this in concert. It's got a lovely, lovely sound to it. I love it. So there's the names of the men that died. Okay, you can look at that. And we call this the Anthem of the Great Lakes. This is not a recording of Gordon's band. These are the guys in my band that put this track together to back me up. So it's like you're going to have everybody here playing it, but it's just me up here, but we're going to add them in, okay? So we'll play this for you. And I want you to know, too, I did find out that Gordon did make it to the pearly gates. When he got there, St. Peter was at the podium. And St. Peter said, "Come on in, Gordon. Bring your guitar. We've got 29 men up here from a ship that are pretty anxious to meet you." Here's the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitchigumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. With a load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November came early. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, including some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. And later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? If you're on drums, I'll nod to you when to come in, okay? The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck, saying, "Fellas, it's too rough to feed ya." At 7 p.m. it grew dark, it was then. He said, fellas, it's been good to know ya. The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew was in peril. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? The searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. They might have split up, or they might have capsized. They may have broke deep and took water. And all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Lake Huron rolls, Superior sings in the rooms of her ice-water mansion. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. The islands and bays are for sportsmen. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can send her. And the iron boats go, as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. In a rustic old hall in Detroit they pray, in the Maritime Sailors' Cathedral. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitche-Gumee. Superior, they said, never gives up her dead when the gales of November come early. Thank you.